Welcome again to Wickerson Studios. My lighting's not great, but I believe if I talk in a calm voice, which is not in my nature, I can make this run pretty smooth. I'm going to take a look at the wheelbarrows and that I've generated out of burlap and plaster for a show called This Equipment Belongs to the Earth in 2005 in Kansas City, Kansas at the Lady Volco Center. I did produce one in bronze, gave wings, the help of Catherine Grimes, and then the rest, I think it was 40 wheelbarrows, kind of resting upon their own weights, and then the bronze wheelbarrow was fabricated in, I think, Monel casting at the Kansas City Art Institute, and the overall installation kind of looked like this. That said, I think it would be interesting to have a look at some Tinkercad models and generating some geometries that actually use a bit of trigonometry and a little bit of math. And you may find yourself gravitating towards that as a, I'm going to hit escape on this so I simplify the image. And basically, it's when you start playing around with Tinkercad and decide, I hope I haven't lost everything. Yeah, there it is. Sorry about that. It's when you start playing with forms and geometries and you realize you want to start doing things. You'll find in this variable a and b as 4 and 12 can be altered. As I run that script, basically I'm just generating a piece of lumber, then moving up and transferring one with a loop that gets progressively shorter in length but also higher in the z-axis and actually rotated a bit around. So it's basically a scale, a move, and a rotate applied to a loop, and you can change the amount you want to do with that. But if you're going to start playing this way, you may as well get a little bit farther into the maths that you might find interesting. So very quickly, I start to generate a script. If you take a look at this one, and it's just running on the side, I'll show the final one in a minute. Basically, I'm creating an object, and I'm using the sine function, which they give you quite a bit to play with, cosine, tan, cotangent, actually the a sine, a cos, and a tan. I don't really use those. I don't use the absolute value so much, even though you could. You could round up. You can use square root and logarithms if you want to get farther into that. I think it's pretty interesting that it's offered there at this introductory level to dealing with geometries and modifications. But you can see my form is actually generating a couple of scripts and a few loops. I'm using positives and negatives. I'm adding in parts to make it have handles and legs. And whenever you have that kind of glossing sheen like that, it means you have geometries over top of one another. And what I have to do in the end is basically bring in all my objects 1, 2, 0, 1, and 2, and then group them together and delete them, and you're left with a fairly interesting wheelbarrow. And I think that's the one that's in the middle of this one. That's not the script I'm going to break down and show, but I do like that little script that makes a fairly organic, strange-looking wheelbarrow. Functional, I'm not so sure. You'd have to kind of play with it. So that's an interesting little script to run out and take a look at how short it is. It produces an interesting geometry, and you can bring it in to Rhino and take a look at it as a technical drawing if you want, and all the other values of what you can bring in there. You can even take it to an interesting render and ray traced and do some interesting things with it. Later on, as we get into scripting these away from Tinkercode and go into Grasshopper, you're going to find applying them to some interesting Python nodes and some scripts, and also taking them into augmented reality can be very exciting. This video series starts very simply, but it does get complex pretty quickly, not unlike my digital sculpture class, and then the second level of that, algorithmic modeling. And I've been growing alongside the school and alongside the students, and we'll see the measure of its worth when we start to see the grads that come out of it in the next few years. Back to this code, I'm going to go into this one, and we're actually going to, you can see this one's running pretty wildly right now, right in the middle of its script with some nice colors applied to it. But I do like the geometry that this one generates, and even though it still is parametric and comes out in many different ways, you may find it interesting how it's created. So I'm going to hit stop and take it to step and show you this script. And we are not recording. I think, yes, we are recording. I'm not sure how many minutes in we are. We'll see. Okay, so keep recording. We're going to run through and we're going to grab some variables, and I've labeled them. Let me hit reset. M, O, S, C, R, and G. Don't ask me why, but that's the names I gave it. And we're going to enter into creating a new object, bringing in a piece of lumber, and moving it. And we're going to move it in a rotation tied to the sine curve. So you're going to see it does some nice things amplified on the side. The height is actually S, a random variable. We're going to move that, and you're going to have to follow the script a little bit, being that it is one of the variables multiplied by sine curve, which is actually a multiplication of squaring by multiplying j with j, which is the number that's coming out through that loop. Choosing 1 and going to g, whatever number variably comes up here, and you'll see what happens as I roll through that script. You see you get a kind of undulating, interesting form that makes what I think a fairly interesting shape. And if we run it again, well, I won't. It made a pretty cool shape to follow. We're going to go into the next script and follow that one pretty much straight through, just manipulating and turning that, putting on a couple of handles and geometries, a couple of legs, as you see that, and we exit out by deleting that initial object. Let's go into the next script, which is bringing in a negative form, moving it forward, and carving out a negative for where the wheel would actually situate itself. Sometimes it kind of destroys the geometry a bit. It doesn't make much sense. Structurally, you have to wonder if this would hold together, but if you're taking it to a watertight mesh and 3D printing it on a small level, you could technically, turn that into a burnout into a shell or a complex sand bowl, and you could turn it into metal, and then this thing would hold together as a cast piece. The final object 5 is bringing in the wheel, and it's not too exciting. I haven't done any spokes or negatives in it. I basically made a diameter. Actually, maybe I am making a, what am I doing as I run through the script? It might not be working on this one, but I did run through and generate something. I'm not really sure. I'll have to run it again. Let's try that again and see if that wheel is actually connected. This may not be the final draft. It says Wheelbarrow 005 final, but I don't know if it was my final iteration. But I did want to show that because it is fairly interesting script. As you go through, you pull in your variables, you do your first sine curve influence to your shape, you put on the accessories that make this kind of get a handle on it and hold it up off the ground. Then you enter into creating its wheel. We'll see if something different happens in this object 5. If not, even though I'm fighting the radius, let's see what happens. What is happening down here? It's running through a script, but maybe it's not long enough. I'll have to check that out and see what the consequences are. I have to wonder why it's doing all this. Could be the variable that was chosen just doesn't have enough length to provide what it's doing. So I'll have to take a look at that elsewhere. Run it one more time and see what happens. Yeah, same type of thing. It's choosing a different amplification on sine. It's choosing different lengths. It's being pretty subtle, and it's changing its width or scaling its width in the y-axis. And I'll just flip it back around and have some fun. I do enjoy taking the logic and the construction of these things out of Tinkercad and then applying it to a much more detailed and extensive node network in Grasshopper. But just see if you have a knack and an interest in this. Find out if you're curious. Find out if it's something you want to do. Once again, my script is kind of obsolete. I think what I'll do is just leave this one because it didn't generate the most interesting of forms. Go back into Codeblocks, take a look at my models, and just bear with me a minute. I can go down and see what we have on 6. We've got some wheelbarrows here. That's a sign test, which was just playing around with shapes that I could actually play with that I thought I liked a little better. We'll get into chains and other things later on, going through a few of the other scripts. I want to see if I actually, a lot of these are my kids are playing away and taking copies of my files and generating kind of what kids like to do, which is pretty cool. Always take a time. I enjoy working alongside. Here's the Wheelbarrow 1, going into a little more detail. And I probably started a second series and came back to it. You can see it here. Wheelbarrow 4, Wheelbarrow 5. This one's probably a little more interesting And if you just bear with me, I'll load it up. And we'll take a look at the script. We'll run it, and you'll see the same type of thing happens. I'm generating all those loops as it goes through the maths. It's doing the first one, and we'll shrink that, see what happens. So you can see it running through after the variables, the similar script. It'll do something else. It'll move it in another way. And then in the finale, as we look down here, there isn't that. Here's that final loop. Let's end up seeing what that one does when we get there. This one's got a bit more of a sine function undulating it. I'm actually putting in under braces using the same language and information that was coming off of the past form, and probably thinking a little more structurally. I'm not sure what I'm bringing. I'm bringing the second one as a negative, and that's really just to allow this kind of, I thought I was cutting out the negative of those shapes. Now I'm taking it for a spin, flipping it over. I guess those are just little rungs that I could catch lumber on and take up some trees. Never really produced this object, just had fun making it. As we get through this script down here, carved out the negative. That's what this final script is really intended to do. Put in a wheel, have fun with a spoke, and put that into place, and we should be done. So that's an interesting one, and just for fun, I will take it, produce an XDL, show you quickly how you can grab it, take your file, save as, probably going to Tinkercode, Wheelbarrows, and I'll call that Wheelbarrow. I'm just going to call it Wheelbarrow 10 because I know I don't have one of those. Save, and then go back in to my top view here. I'll pull that one out of the way, and I'll just do my little import. With any luck, this will work. And I kind of missed a little bit of geometry there. Let's pull it in. You see that little bit that was left there. Pull it in as that object. Take this object out. It's not really needed. And you can see that other object that came in with the spokes. So it's the only one with the spokes. Can't really see much in a ray traced image. I'll move over to artistic. See, that's the one with spokes. So you really start doing things with this. It's a fun program. I don't mind troubleshooting and showing an awful lot with it. It's really just to garner interest in the program and why you might want to do it. I have had some really, I've had a lot of fun with introducing Python and randomly generating forms as they render in the Rhino window, and we'll get into that. And I've actually made a whirlwind of wheelbarrows just for the sake of trying it. Like I said, interest or links that you might want to do if you not only went to michaelwickerson.com, but you actually wanted to go to wickersonstudios.com, and that's the web page, sorry, wickersonstudios.com. You can always jump into this journal, which highlights a history of what I've kind of looked at in programming, in my own business. And here's a little quick image of the wheelbarrows as they were being rendered in real time in a whirlwind of glass kind of forms following this line path and being generated. So that's a Python script and Grasshopper node for Rhino 3D renders animation and augmented reality, because then you can export it. You can put it onto your phone and do some fun things with some programs. A lot of information. I'm just trying to get you interested. Leave comments. I know it's a bit chaotic, but that's in my nature, and I'll slow down and answer particular questions when you like. Thanks very much for watching.